Today we're talking with cybersecurity lawyer Annie Haggar about business and data and the rules around protecting that data now, but also into the future as well. Annie Haggar is the founder of CyberGC, a legal practice that specialises in all this kind of stuff. How are you, Annie?
I'm good, thanks, Charlie. Thanks for having me on today.
No, good to have a chat to you. Okay, so businesses, we retain data on client information, all different kinds of clients. We have to protect that information legally now, but in the future. Where are we at the moment in terms of our responsibilities, in terms of the data that we have on hand and protecting it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it depends on the kind of business you're in. So everybody's got an obligation to protect personal information, and that's not new. We've had the Privacy Act for quite a while now. But there are changing obligations depending on which industry you're in. The Security of Critical Infrastructure Act came in a couple of years ago, and that now has 11 industries that are covered by that. And so it's quite likely that you're also captured by the Security of Critical Infrastructure, or SOCI Act, as they call it, and that there are obligations under that. But if you run a company, and so many small businesses are structured as companies, then you have obligations under the Corporations Act. If you're a director of a company, you have obligations. And then also, if you're a regulated business, like those in the financial services industry, there are also regulations on cybersecurity for those. And all of them have minimum requirements for you to take action to protect your business, but also your customers and clients.
You mentioned whether your business is in a particular area that that comes under these legislation or these rules. Just say I'm Joe and I run a plumbing business. I've set it up as a company. I'm issuing invoices. I'm taking in customer information. What's my kind of level of implication in this space?
Yeah, so you will have personal data, that of your customers, particularly if there's people whose homes that you're going to, you're running a personal business rather than business to business operation. You'll have obligations under the Corporations Act because you run a company, and you may well be the director or sole director or one of a couple of directors for that company. And that may well be it. Unless you're a big provider in the water industry, you're probably not going to be caught under Security of Critical Infrastructure. But that said, if we were to take an example of a small accounting business, they are actually captured by other types of legislation as well. So it's really important to work out what your regulations are that apply to your business, because it's different for everyone depending on the size and the type of business that you're running.
Sounds like a bit of a regulatory jigsaw puzzle, because I'm just a simple plumber going around and making sure that everybody's pipes are working correctly and all that kind of stuff that goes with that job. Or I'm a chippy or a sparky, or running a dry cleaning business, for example, whatever it is. This all sounds pretty complicated and a bit of a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, it sure is. And that's exactly how I describe it to clients. We need to work out what your jigsaw puzzle looks like, because everybody's got a different jigsaw puzzle, and you might have different pieces to your mate who runs a slightly different business. If you're in the construction industry, you'll have something that's different to you if you're running a plumbing business or a landscaping business. So it's really important to work out what are the pieces in your jigsaw puzzle, and to get a really clear picture of what that jigsaw puzzle looks like and what you need to do.
When I talk to businesses, there's often this position of, I don't understand any of that. I'm just good at this bit that I do, this area of the community that I'm serving in my business. Go back to the plumbing example. Not really focused on this cyber stuff that you're talking about. Is that what you're finding when you talk to businesses?
Yeah, very much so. Small businesses are already under strain, right? One person, two people have to do so much of what it takes day to day to run a business. And now they're going to have to look at cybersecurity as well. And what's actually happening is that the government is really looking to try and help small business. They've announced new funding to help that, and they've actually got some great resources on their website, which is cyber.gov.au, dedicated to small business. So one of the things that small businesses can do, I know it feels overwhelming, is to start by going to the cyber.gov.au website and having a look at those resources, because it's not enough to just hope that you might not be hit by a breach. You're going to be hit by a breach, either directly on your business or impacted by one of your suppliers having a cyber attack hit you, or one of your clients having a cyber attack that impacts on your business. You can't avoid it. And we say in the cybersecurity industry that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
And you give me an example of a cybersecurity breach or a hack that you've seen in businesses like what we're talking about. How does this sort of manifest into a real life scenario?
Yeah. So they can happen in all sorts of different ways. There's one that I've seen that's targeting new employees. So anyone who's posting on LinkedIn to something like that to say, hey, I've got a new job. The hackers are actually looking at that and they're targeting those new employees. And because they know that they're going to be new to the business and they're not going to have a lot of knowledge about the processes, and they're running campaigns to try and convince those new employees to spend money and buy gift cards or to do things like change bank account details in the payment systems so that instead of paying your suppliers who you owe money, you're actually paying the hackers. And I've seen businesses done out of tens of thousands of dollars that way because people don't know what to look out for. They're new and they're trying to impress their new bosses, and they just answer the phone or answer an email trying to be super helpful. And what it results in is money going out the door to the bad actors.
Oh dear.
And it's hitting every industry. That type of attack doesn't discriminate.
The role that you're in, are you parachuted in once things have gone wrong, or are you doing more work preemptively setting up businesses, making sure they don't fall into this trap?
Yeah, I'm on the preemptive side very much so. I much prefer to help clients reduce the likelihood that they're going to have a breach and to better protect themselves against having a breach in the first place than just helping them clean up the mess. Obviously, there is work that's needed on helping after a breach, but I much prefer to get in there earlier so that you reduce that likelihood and you reduce the severity of the breach and how hard it hits your business. And you can do that through simple processes that you introduce, through training. From a legal perspective, we can help in protecting your legal liability in through the way that you're engaging with your customers and your also with your contractors and staff. So there's lots of different things you can do from a legal perspective to protect your business. But there's also things you have to do when you have a breach. And that's really important to get good legal advice when you have a breach. There's lots of different people you have to report the breach to. And there's lots of things you're going to need to do in terms of understanding the breach, who's been impacted, telling your impacted customers and suppliers and things. And a lot of that needs a lawyer to help out with.
Let's
and that's
talk
part of what
Joe the plumber again. He's doing his own accounts on MYOB. He's got a whole bunch of clients and he notices that there's a bit of malware on his computer because his internet security flies up and says, hey, there's malware here. It's a pretty basic example, I know, but what does Joe the plumber then need to do from a legal perspective now that he's known to have seen this breach and knows that it's occurred? Where does he go from here from a legal perspective?
Yeah, so the first thing he should do is get a IT security professional to help him understand what kind of breach he's got. Is it just a bit of malware, or is it that actually someone has used that malware to take data, we call it exfiltrating, take data out of his systems, and that data has been stolen. And even if there's just somebody who's in his system, in his computer, who's looking at data, that's accessing that data without authorization, that's also something that's a breach of the Privacy Act and also is considered a breach. So first thing he needs to do is to get some professional security help to work out what kind of breach he's been hit by. And there are wonderful security experts that do that. That I call like the SWAT team of security, and they come in when you've had a breach and help you out. The next thing you need to do is to tell the regulators, and also if you've got insurance, you need to tell your insurance provider you've been hit by a breach, but you need to tell the regulators, and that could include ASIC if you're a company. It'll include, if you're a financial services company, there'll be regulators to tell there. And then, as I mentioned, SOCI each has their own requirements as well.
Do you help in this space, Annie? I mean, you're obviously plugged into the pathway to follow here. Do you actually say, look, you know, we'll take this bit, and this bit from here, but you're going to focus on this bit, and this is how you manage it?
Yeah, we sure do. And that's actually part of what you can do in advance is to do your incident response plan. Every business should have one, doesn't matter how small. And that's your plan of action when you realize that you think you've been breached. It's your phone number for your managed security guy who's going to help you work out what's happening with your IT expert who's going to come in and do the forensics. It's got the phone number for your cybersecurity lawyer. And that's when, because your incident response plan has been put together before you've had a breach, you just then have to follow the bouncing ball with each of those steps, call your lawyer, call your insurer, etc. It's all mapped out for you in that plan. What's really hard is if you don't have one of those plans and you're trying to work it all out in a rush when you've got hackers inside your system and you don't know what they've got access to. So you don't want to be in that situation, and you can avoid it by doing your incident response plan early.
One of the things, obviously I talk to a lot of businesses, but one of the things I get when I'm talking to them is this unknown as to the cost of going and preemptively doing all of this stuff. What's the flip between setting all this stuff up and investing in that process versus trying the post-breach cleanup? Where are we talking at? If one's $1, is the other one $10? How does that usually sit?
So the statistics that came out from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre recently showed that it costs small business about $39,000 to respond to a cyber incident. And that's an average cost. So it costs some more than that. Big business, medium-sized businesses, different numbers in there. Medium-sized business is about $88,000. And big business is can be up into the tens of millions of dollars, depending on how big the breach is. The cost of doing an incident response plan and getting some guys on call to help you look at your security of your systems, I'd have to get the quotes because it depends on the complexity of your systems. But you're talking in the the tens of thousands, certainly 10 grand maybe to come in and do a health check and then to tighten up the screws so that you don't have vulnerable passwords, your systems are up to date and don't have big gaping security patches that need to be applied. That kind of work can cost relatively small amounts of money, certainly compared to the cost of a breach. And it's also worth asking whether your insurers, if you've got cyber insurance, will help with the cost of a breach recovery, because that way you'll know if you're covered, if you do have to call your lawyers and your incident responders, whether that will be covered by your insurance.
As a lawyer, are you more targeted than other businesses?
The legal profession is hugely targeted, actually, because they deal with lots of personal information and lots of really sensitive business information. And often, if you think about people who are doing conveyancing, buying and selling properties, they're targeted a lot. The conveyancers and real estate agents, but also the lawyers that work with them are big targets. And because of that, the legal industry is really looking at how they can tighten up their security.
Government usually brings in a set of rules and guidelines at a particular point, and there's usually a period of time in which everyone's given a bit of leeway. After that point, they start cracking down and making things far more pressured to do things correctly. Where are we at the moment?
So again, it depends on which industry you're in. If you're in a critical infrastructure, one that's covered by the Security Critical Infrastructure Act, that window for leniency has finished, actually. So they announced the laws. They gave people a year to get up to speed and have your critical risk management plan in place, your cybersecurity risk management plan. And that was supposed to be in place by August last year. So if you're in one of the SOCI industry areas, you really need to get your skates on to catch up, because there are consequences for not having done the minimum things required under the Act. In other areas, if you're a financial services license holder, so like an accounting firm, financial advisors, then APRA has standards that you're required to meet. There's no grace period for those. You're required to meet those right now. Corporations Act is the same. If you're a director for a company, you are expected to have taken what we call reasonable steps to protect the cybersecurity of your company, and that's in place right now. So there's no grace periods going on. We're not already doing something about it. It's time to get our heads out of the sand and take action, because the government is in the space where they're expecting business to have put in place these requirements.
Yeah, I imagine that in the future, months and years from now, it's going to be even stricter as it sort of all of these rules filter down to other businesses which aren't currently affected so much.
Yeah. And they're talking a lot about security of your supply chain. So even if your business is quite secure, you are part of a supply chain. You've got all the suppliers to your business. People might be people who provide you with services like cleaning, or if you've got office plants or reception services. You might have people who provide you with products. So my uncle runs a pool company, and he's got lots of pool chemical suppliers. So he has got relationships with all of those. If one of them has a breach and the information about his company is stolen, then that is the same as him having a breach of his company, because it's a supply chain attack. So it's not enough just to think about your personal security. You also have to be thinking about that broader supply chain that you're part of, and asking your suppliers what they're doing about being secure, because it impacts you just as much.
I don't know if you've seen the original Wall Street movie, Annie, but in there is a supply chain attack where
Yeah.
the main character, played by Charlie Sheen, goes and buys a share of a cleaning business, which is cleaning the offices of a law firm, and he finds out all this privileged information. That's a supply
Yeah.
chain attack, right?
Sure is. Sure is. That's a bit old school. But actually, hackers still do that too. So your physical security is still really important, not just online. It's also, the security is about your personal security, your people's security, your office security, and also, of course, your IT and your online security.
I've been following this space for a number of years. One of the things I'm noticing is banks more and more becoming less speedy or supportive of repaying money that may have been stolen from a bank account holder or business. This is just anecdotal through the stories that I see in the mainstream media. What do you do if you're a business and somebody has breached your security plan and you've inadvertently transferred 100 grand to them when you were meant to be transferring it to somebody else, the real supplier? You've accidentally sent it to the cyber security bad guys.
It's hard. The banks are doing a huge amount. They're actually, most of the banks are really good when it comes to security. So it's likely not to be a fault with their systems. It's likely to be a fault with the way you have managed your security. And I don't mean to blame the individual people running businesses and the population, but it's like if you build Fort Knox, but then you leave your keys with the name of the house that they're to lying around in the car park, or you leave them at the pub, and then somebody uses those keys to walk straight in. It's because people have really sloppy personal security that's actually usually how these things happen. There are more sophisticated breaches, and we can talk about those in a second. But the biggest thing people can do is to actually take some personal security steps. Stop reusing your passwords for more than one account. If you reuse a password more than once, then you're vulnerable. You also need to be using complex passwords, because computers can just brute force attack passwords that aren't very complicated. So we're talking passwords that are 14 characters or more, and use a mixture of uppercase and lowercase numbers, and use a mixture of special characters and numbers, right? So a complex password. And then also turning on multi-factor authentication is one of the biggest things you can do to protect yourself. If you've got all of that turned on, then you're actually in pretty good shape for somebody hacking your bank account and stealing money. Now, the bit where you accidentally transfer money to the wrong company, that's happening a lot. And so what happens is the bad guys might intercept an invoice, or they might be inside your system, and they change the invoice details about who the money's got to go to. And you transfer the money to the wrong bank account details, and it's gone. What should you do? You should report it to the police. They're not necessarily going to be able to get the money back, but they actually have been recovering people's money.
Wow.
Not everyone, but they actually have been managing to do it for some people. You should also immediately call your bank. So before you call the police, call the bank, because the bank can sometimes stop the transaction before the money becomes available to the bad guys. The other thing that you can do is to call your insurer, because if you have cyber insurance, it does sometimes cover those kinds of losses. Now, if you've been the victim of somebody who's supposed to send you money, but actually they accidentally sent it to the bad guys instead, there's also things you can do. There was a case in the ACT last year where one business took another business to the small claims tribunal. Don't need lawyers to do that. You can just go represent yourself. And they had lost $5,000 because it had been sent to the bad guys instead of being sent to the correct invoice details. And they were able to get their money back. So because it was the fault of the customer, There was
So,
a threat actor.
so Andy, you
Sorry,
mean
Charlie.
to tell me that a business generated an invoice, sent it to somebody at business or person or whatever, they paid the invoice but to the wrong entity because they were
Yep.
breached, and then the entity that actually did the work or sold them the goods weren't going to get paid and they had to go to small claims? Is that happening?
Yep. That's right. Because the customer in that sense, so they had the goods and they said, but we've paid $5,000. We're out of pocket. The fact that it didn't end up in your bank account is not our fault. And the supplier went, well, hang on, we're still out $5,000 and you've got the goods. So there's
Yeah.
still a debt outstanding. And so that was what the recovery action was. It was a debt recovery action. And what the court found was that the security issue happened at the customer's end. And the customer hadn't taken any action to confirm the bank account details with the supplier. And they had simply transferred the money without taking any extra steps to check. And so the
Goodness.
debt's still outstanding and they were asked to pay it and required to pay it.
Are we seeing more sophisticated attacks? Are you seeing them become more and more specialised and sophisticated?
So I'm seeing them become actually less sophisticated at one end and more sophisticated at the other. So when you've got an attack like actually the one on the big law firm last year that happened, that was a supply chain attack, and it hit almost all of Australian government agencies, hit all the big banks, it hit the airlines. That one involved hacking into an employee's personal device, getting through into the network, and then spending quite a bit of time inside the network extracting data. Those ones require some IT skills, right? The ones that require almost no IT skills are the phishing emails and text messages and voice phishing. They're not sophisticated, but they're the ones that I think are most likely to hit a small business because they can be done at scale. They don't require a lot of information, just a phone number or an email address for the business and some small details like, who your customers are likely to be. You don't even have to hack into your systems to be hit by one of those. They're just social engineering. So they're the ones that aren't very sophisticated technically, but that are having a huge impact on business.
As a cybersecurity lawyer, are you busier now than you've ever been before?
Sure am. A few years ago, there wasn't such a thing as a cybersecurity lawyer, and now people are asking all the time for help, what they can do in advance of a breach, but of course, unfortunately, what they can do once they've been breached as well.
What's the best bit about working in this business? I imagine you're working with lots of different companies and people. What's the thing that you've found the most interesting so far?
I find the pace of change and the way that the threat actors, the bad guys, are constantly changing the way they attack. It's so interesting because they're so clever and you're always kept on your toes. So this area is never changing. If you like a job that's the same every day, don't go into cybersecurity because you won't like it very much. It changes daily and you've got to be across what all the latest breaches are, what all the latest court cases are, and the government policy is changing all the time. So it's a full-time job just to keep up.
You mentioned latest breaches, not mentioning any big companies, but we've seen big companies be breached. Will we see that again, and will the ramifications for those big companies be different in the near future and longer future because of what you're talking about in terms of legislative changes?
Yeah. So when we talk about what does a business have to do and what's reasonable, it's based on the resources available to that company. So if the big companies get breached and they haven't done the basics, then the regulators are going to come down on them a lot harder than they would on the smaller companies who have fewer resources, right? And the big companies are also on notice. They know what's happened to the big companies who have been breached over the last couple of years, and they're facing regulator investigations and they're facing class action lawsuits. And that's what's in store for any of the big companies that do have a breach. And it's not just the cost of recovering from the breach, it's a long tail of consequences of lawsuits and also fixing your IT operations and restoring your brand and trust in the community. That's where the biggest damage is to every business, big or small, when you have a cyber attack.
If you're the CEO of that business, you may just lose your job as well. Annie Haggar, cybersecurity lawyer, great to have a chat to you. Thanks for taking us through all of those little nuances of the industry that you're in, your experiences, the changes that are coming, and what we can do as businesses to make our businesses more resilient in this space. Always good to have a chat to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Charlie. It's been great having a chat.